A traditional feature of the Russian Tsars was to care for their people, especially the poor. Tsar Nicholas II, as a true Christian, adhered to the centuries-old tradition of mercy, considering it his holy duty to generously help needy subjects. The financial affairs of the Russian emperor were managed by the cabinet of His Imperial Majesty, which was part of the Ministry of the Court, whose officials kept records of the parishes and expenses of all members of the House of Romanov. The cabinet was annually released from the state treasury 200,000 rubles at the personal disposal of the monarch for his needs. Of this amount, the Tsar's own expenses accounted for 20,000 rubles, for a wardrobe and room expenses. The income of the Tsar consisted of the money received by him as an inheritance, from income from real estate, appanages, plus a salary from the state treasury, which, as already mentioned, amounted to 200,000 rubles per year. The ability to sacrifice in the young Nikolai Romanov manifested itself in the years when he was the Tsarevich. Having received an inheritance from his great-grandmother of 4 million rubles in gold, he spent most of it on helping the starving during the crop failure of 1891 to 1892. He at that time headed the Special Committee of the heir of the Tsarevich Nikolai Alexandrovich to combat hunger. By the time of his coronation, Nicholas II had 1,320,000 rubles on his account. Not wanting to burden the state treasury, the Tsar took almost his entire coronation on his own account, 898,000 rubles. The first act published on his behalf after his accession was a rescript addressed to the Moscow Governor-General V.A. Dolgorukov, 15,000 rubles for distribution, at the discretion of the fact, among the residents of Moscow, who are most in need of help. Several 100,000 rubles were distributed to the victims of the Kodinka disaster. The Tsar ordered to issue 1,000 rubles for each orphan family, the expenses of the funeral to take on his account. In addition to the fact that the Tsar ordered to allocate 1,000 rubles to the affected families at a time, the families of the victims received annual state benefits until February 1917. Most of the personal money of Emperor Nicholas II went to donations, pensions, maintenance of borders, hospitals, educational institutions, charitable organizations, allowances, gifts and monetary awards. Courtiers twice a year received expensive gifts from the king. Gifts were also complained to all those who had to communicate with the emperor at least for a short time. The heads of the railways, the heads of the gendarmerie units that provided protection for the royal family, the huntsmen after the end of the hunt in the Belovezskaya Pushcha or Peterhof, etc. One of the old legends spread by revolutionary circles and aimed at discrediting the royal dynasty was the legend of the Romanov capitals abroad. Legend has it that in the Bank of England, the Russian emperors had more than 600 million rubles in gold. Emperor Alexander III, indeed, placed in the Bank of England his personal capital, about 90 million rubles in gold, which he inherited from his father. Emperor Nicholas II, however, was unwilling to keep this money in England. He found it necessary to transfer them to Russia and place them in Russian loans. This translation was arranged with great difficulty. The Bank of England put all sorts of obstacles to the return of money. It took the exceptional skill of the governor of the Russian State Bank, E.D. Plesk, who was forced to personally go to London for this purpose in order to achieve the implementation of this operation. The money was transferred to Russia, and since that time the Tsar has not had any capital abroad. This explains the difficult financial situation of all members of the Romanov dynasty, who after the revolution managed to flee abroad. The capital raised from the Bank of England was spent on charity. According to I.L. Solonovich, the Tsar had a civil leaf of 30 million rubles a year, due to which the best theaters in the world existed with entrance tickets of 17 kopecks, deserts were irrigated, experiments were made on the culture of tea, bamboo, tangerines, etc. The emperor received a huge number of letters every day asking for help, and no one was refused. Donations to various charitable purposes from the own amount of Nicholas II were very significant. The emperor, according to the tradition established in the royal family, supported the activities of the Red Cross. In July 1896, 400 rubles were transferred to the treasury of the Committee for the Care of the Sisters of the Red Cross on behalf of Nicholas II. In 1896, the Tsar, supporting the idea of opening a women's medical institute in St. Petersburg, ordered to allocate 65,000 rubles from the funds of the cabinet of His Imperial Majesty for the purchase of a plot of land for the construction of a hostel for non-resident students. Often the Tsar acted anonymously. In 1901, he ordered to transfer 50 rubles to the editorial office of the magazine, Russian Invalid, as an allowance from an unknown person. Throughout his reign, the king generously donated his personal funds to the construction of new temples. Impressive sums from the personal budget of Nicholas II were donated by him for the construction of the Orthodox Church of St. Mary Magdalene in Darmstadt, in the homeland of his wife Alexandra Fyodorovna. In 1898 to 1899, 194,732 rubles were spent on the construction of this temple. For the decoration of the interiors of the temple, another 23,000 rubles. For the Divyevo monastery, the Tsar allocated, from his own amount, in 1903 44,424 rubles. And in 1904 to 11,434 rubles. In addition to the upper temple, the cathedral had a lower temple, cave in the name of Prep. Seraphim of Sarov. This cathedral was built with large funds provided by the sovereign. In 1913, the Tsar donated 1,000 rubles to the construction of an almshouse in memory of the Tsar's confessor, Protopresbyter Father John Yanushov. Emperor Nicholas II's concerns for the Church of God extended far beyond Russia. Thanks to the generous donations of the Tsar, 17 new Russian churches were built in many European cities, which stood out for their beauty. So, in 1898 he donated 5,000 rubles for the completion of the Orthodox Church in Buenos Aires. In many churches of Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Montenegro, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Libya, Palestine there are gifts of the Tsar martyr. Whole sets of silver-plated vestments, icons and liturgical books were sent to the dioceses of the Serbian, Greek, Bulgarian, Montenegrin, Antiochian, Constantinople and Jerusalem Orthodox autocephalous churches, not to mention generous subsidies for their maintenance. The spiritual activity of the king was inextricably linked with charity, guardianship, care for the poor and wretched. Compassion and heartfelt participation were characteristic of all members of the imperial family. Many hospitals, orphanages, and schools for the blind depended on royal charity. Nicholas II donated significant sums to support education, science and art. In the period from 1896 to 1913, he provided assistance to various educational institutions in the amount of 66,157 rubles in gold. Since the beginning of his reign, the Tsar annually transferred 2 million rubles to support Russian art. With the personal material support of Emperor Nicholas II in 1895, the State Russian Museum was opened in St. Petersburg, the country's first state museum of Russian fine art. The State Memorial Museum of A.V. Suvorov, the first memorial museum in Russia, was also founded by Nicholas II. In 1900, the Tsar built the People's House for St. Petersburg workers with his personal money, a colossal building that housed an opera house for 7,000 seats, a theater hall for 1,500 seats, concert halls where the best orchestras and the best artists performed. At the People's House there was a library, a reading room and an amusement park. The entrance fee to the People's House was purely symbolic, 10 kopecks. The emperor, being an excellent athlete, supported ideas related to the development of sports in Russia. In 1911, the Tsar allocated 5,000 rubles from his own funds to the Bogatyr Society for Physical Education. Nicholas II continued the traditional donations of Alexander III for the arrangement of charitable Christmas trees and annually allocated several hundred rubles for a Christmas tree for poor children. In 1913, for the care of orphans of the rural state, the Romanov Committee was organized, a state charitable institution under the patronage of the emperor. The committee allocated 500,000 rubles for 1914, 5,000 rubles. gave personally the emperor. In 1913, by the highest decree, the All-Russian Guardianship for the Protection of Motherhood and Infancy was established, with the aim of reducing child mortality in Russia, the arrangement of shelters for mothers and children, the first dairy kitchens in Russia, children's hospitals, maternity shelters, etc. The Tsar allocated capital in the amount of 1,010,000 rubles for the arrangement of the guardianship, donated by St. Petersburg and Moscow private commercial banks at his disposal in commemoration tercentenary of the accession of the House of Romanov. The sovereign master of the Russian land often traveled around Russia. For example, there are memories of his visit to the Bryansk province in 1915. Visiting the families of workers of the mechanical plant in the village of Bezhitsi of the named province, Nicholas II left expensive gifts as a souvenir. To the master who met him with bread and salt, he presented a gold watch. He gave money to the children of workers who met him at the Bryansk plant. As the wing adjutant A. Mordvanov wrote, his kindness was not of a superficial quality, did not show out and did not decrease from countless disappointments. He helped as much as he could from his own funds, without thinking about the amount he was asking for, including to people to whom I knew he was not personally disposed. He will soon give away all that he has. The late Prince N.D. Obolonsky, who runs His Majesty's cabinet, once told me, basing even his desire to leave his post. The Bolsheviks created a myth that the royal family was bathed in luxury, that the Romanovs spent fabulous money on their own needs, although in fact they lived rather modestly. Nicholas II was thrifty and modest in habits, tastes and clothes. Colonel E.S. Kabylinsky, in his needs he was very modest. I saw the worn pants, the worn boots on him back in Tsarskoye. To support this or that charitable society, the king had to reduce personal expenses. Sometimes he would tell family members to live modestly for 2 or 3 months. Nicholas II donated so much that he sometimes had to ask for an advance from the amount that the government assigned to him. There is no number of blessings rendered to his subjects by the martyr king. Prince Dmitry Obolensky recalled, "In my Tula estate, the village of Shikoski, a stone temple was being built, and on the occasion of the war there was a hitch in the construction. And so, thanks to the generosity of the Tsarists, it was possible to complete the construction, and in 1915, at the consecration of this temple by the Tula Archbishop Parthenius, to proclaim many years for the beloved monarch, 5. Once, when the Tsar and his family stopped at one of the railway stations, a local official turned to him, complaining that he did not have enough for a small salary for a huge family. The generous Tsar promised that he would allocate him 30 rubles a month, and Cesarevich Alexei said that he would add another 40 rubles from himself. Rs. O.P. Ollengren, the head of the Vasiliostrovskaya Women's Gymnasium, said that often in the evenings the Tsar invited her to his office and, despite being very busy and tired, asked to be provided with lists of the neediest children who were under his care. The sums that the sovereign donated from his personal funds were sometimes very large. One day, Mrs. Ollengren decided to say that the amount was too great, that you could not graze on everyone, to which the emperor firmly replied, "The king must attack everyone." At the end of the audience, always in a whisper, he asked no one to say a word about his help. At the beginning of the First World War, Emperor Nicholas II, without hesitation, donated 200 million rubles to the needs of the army, to help the wounded, crippled and their families. During the war, Nicholas II's expenses under the article, Allowances to God-pleasing, medical and various generally useful institutions, increased many times. In 1916 and 1917, for these purposes, the emperor spent respectively 427,763 and 431,583 rubles. 6 donations on behalf of the emperor and his wife to the Charitable Committee of the Grand Duchess Tatiana Nikolaevna, for the provision of temporary assistance to victims of hostilities, amounted to 425,000 rubles. Who were in the concentration camps of the powers at war with Russia? As a result of all the costs associated with the war, the Royal Treasury was empty. In March 1917, An audit of the provisional government revealed that the former Tsar had only 908,000 rubles in his account instead of the estimated millions. As Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich recalled, "Looking back at the life led by the imperial family, I must admit that this way of life could not be compared with the life of the magnates of capital. I doubt the kings of steel, cars or oil would have been satisfied with such a modest yacht that belonged to the sovereign. And I am convinced that no head of any major enterprise would retire as poor as the sovereign was on the day of his abdication." Yes, the Tsar was impoverished materially, but until the last minute of his life he remained a highly spiritual man devoted to the Orthodox faith, the fatherland and his people. By the decision of the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church, he and his family were glorified in the rank of Holy Royal Passion Bearers in the host of new martyrs and confessors of Russia. It is impossible to list all the acts of mercy of our last Holy Russian Emperor. Let his charity serve as an example for the new Russian capitalists.